today on the Irish. We'll accept that. You're very welcome to our presentation on the Irish welfare system and cross-border workers. We're going to cover a number of different topics. The first topic we'll cover, too many. We'll have an introduction to the pay-related social insurance system in the Republic of Ireland. Then we'll look at varying welfare payments, like payments for unemployed people, payments for people who are sick or who have a disability. Then we'll turn our attention to the welfare payments for families, and we'll finish up by looking at the pensioners, people who may have an entitlement both sides of the border. Now, it's a long presentation, and it would have been a little bit longer had Anne-Marie not suggested that I cut back a little bit. So the slides that I cut out from the original presentation, you'll find them at the very end under additional information, and they're mainly concerned with the PRSI requirements for varying different payments. Now, we've regular breaks for questions, and if you have any questions, perhaps you can pop them into the chat box and Anne-Marie will call them out at varying stages. So what we're going to do first of all is we'll just have a couple of introductory slides on cross-border workers, habitual residency, the common travel area, just to set the scene. Now, a cross-border worker, they're also known as frontier workers, is a person who lives in one country and works in another country, returning to the country they live in at least once a week. And for example, if you live in the south and you work in the north, you're a cross-border worker if you return to your home in the south at least once a week. Now, we have the common travel area between Ireland and the UK. And common travel area rights, they can only be exercised by citizens of Ireland and the UK. And if you're not a citizen of Ireland or the UK, you cannot exercise common travel area rights. And for the purpose of the common travel area, the UK covers England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Isle of Man, and the Channel Islands. And the common travel area means that as an Irish or a UK citizen, you have the right to live, to travel, to work and study within the common travel area. And these rights have been recognised in the most recent legislation covering Brexit called the Immigration and Social Security Withdrawal Act of 2020. Now, habitual residents and cross-border workers. If you live south and you work north, frontier workers are generally regarded as habitually resident in the Republic of Ireland, even when working abroad across the border, if they return at regular intervals to the Republic of Ireland. And similarly, if you live in the north and you work in the south, frontier workers who work in Ireland but have their main centre of interest across the border in the north and return there at frequent intervals are generally regarded as habitually resident. Now, Social Security post-Brexit, basically nothing has changed between the Ireland and the UK. Ireland and the UK have agreed to continue paying social welfare to cross-border workers and to recognise insurance contributions, that is, national insurance contributions paid in the north or PRSI paid south in the other country, in the same way as when the UK was part of the EU. Now, what we're going to do now over the next number of slides is we're going to look at the pay-related social insurance system in the Republic of Ireland. Now, I am aware some of you may be well familiar with this, others less so. But just to set the scene, the current social insurance system was introduced in Ireland in 1953. And between 1953 and 1979, anyone working in Ireland would have paid for and received what was known as a weekly social welfare stamp. And that stamp cost a flat rate of money per week. And all that went on very well until 1979, when some politician decided that they could get more money out of people if they had a pay-related system. So meaning the more money you earned, the higher your rate of social insurance. And that's when in 1979, the pay-related or the PRSI system was introduced. Now, payment of a PRSI contribution is compulsory south for persons working between the ages of 16 and 66. After 66, you're no longer compulsorily insured. There's no question of you paying PRSI. And that can become a bit of a problem if at age 66, I discover that basically I need a couple of more contributions in order to get maybe a higher rate of pension. I can't do anything about it. I can't pay after age 66. Now, there's three main classes of PRSI that you probably will come up against. Class A is known as the full contribution. It's payable at 4% for people working in industrial, commercial, and service type employment who have reckonable pay of 38 euros or more per week. So if I earn 38 euros a week, I pay 4% of that. That's what I'm scheduled to pay. But there is, of course, a concession for low income workers. My employer will pay the PRSI and I will be fully covered. And the contribution I pay based on earning 38 euros a week is every bit as much use for a state pension as the one perhaps somebody else is paying based on earning 1,000 euros per week. So that's a good thing about it. Now, there's modified rates of insurance. These are known as class B, C, or D, and they're paid by public servants who join the public service, like civil service, semi-state organizations, the health boards working as nurses, doctors. Those people who joined before 1995 are covered under class B, C, or D. They pay far less in, as you can see there. They pay less than 1%, 0.9%, and the far fewer entitlements. And the other class that you'll come across frequently is class S, self-employed. Contributions paid by self-employed persons. And as a self-employed person, if you have taxable income of at least 5,000 euros per annum, you're in the PRSI system and you pay your 4%. Minimum charge there is 500 euros. And if you earn less than 5,000, let's assume your business has a bad year, well, then you're no longer in the system. And the only way you can remain in the system is by becoming a voluntary contributor. And again, you pay your 500 euros a year for that. Now, looking at Class A or the full contribution, we look here at the benefits that are available to a person south who pays Class A PRSI. Well, the first one would be job seekers benefit if you lose your job, illness benefit if you're sick and unable to work. Then there are payments connected with pregnancy, like maternity benefit, paternity, parents benefit, and we'll be looking at all of those later on. There's a carer's benefit that allows you to leave your job for up to 2 years to give full-time care and attention to somebody. And there's an occupational injuries benefit scheme that covers you if you're injured at work. They're the benefits. There's also pensions based on Class A PRSI. And the first one would be invalidity pension. And that's payable south if you're totally incapable of work on account of a disability. There's a widow's or surviving civil partner's contributory pension. That's payable upon the death of your spouse or civil partner. And of course, the big one at the end, of course, is the state pension contributory that's payable south at the age of 66 at present. And we'll look at all of those payments during the course of today's training. Now, The social welfare benefits and pensions based on Class S. The state pension is available to the self-employed. Widows or surviving civil partners contributory pension, again payable on the death of a spouse or a civil partner. A guardian's payment, that's paid if both parents are deceased, and it's paid to support a child into adult life. There's maternity, adoptive benefits, and paternity benefits available. Now, for the self-employed, invalidity pension was only made available to them since December 2017. And that was a great plus for them, because prior to 2017, if you were self-employed and suffered a very serious illness or disability, the only payment available to you was that means-tested disability allowance, and perhaps you may not pass a means test for that, and you would have been left without any welfare payment. So thankfully nowadays, invalidity pension is available to the self-employed, and job seekers benefit has also been made available in recent times, back in November 2019. So the lot of the self-employed is improving all the time, and they pay 4% of a contribution to get all of these benefits back. Now, when it comes to claiming a welfare payment, there are 3 types of welfare payments in the South. There are contributory payments. These are based on PRSI contributions, and you'll get them as a right if you're unemployed or sick or a pensioner. Then we have non-contributory payments. These are means tested, and they're in the system for people who don't have PRSI contributions. Maybe they just don't have enough PRSI, or perhaps their benefit has run out in the case of maybe an unemployed person who initially goes on to the PRSI-based job seekers benefit. That only lasts for 9 months. And if they haven't, say, sourced another job after 9 months, they have no choice but to go looking for the means-tested job seekers allowance. We also have universal payments. There's no means test attached to them, and there's no PRSI requirements. And 2 examples there would be child benefit. Every child in the country is entitled to child benefit, and free travel is available to everybody at age 66. There's no requirements attached to that, no means test or whatever. Now, when it comes to claiming a welfare payment, it can be made up of 3 different elements for some people. Firstly, you will always get a personal rate. So if you qualify for a social welfare payment, you'll get an amount for yourself, and it's called a personal rate of payment. That is guaranteed. There's a possibility then of an increase for a qualified adult, and that can be paid if you have a dependent spouse, civil partner, or cohabitant. And then there are increases for qualified children. They can be paid if you have a dependent child or children. And the rate is €40 per week if your child is under 12, or €48 when your child is over age 12. And a dependent child from a social welfare point of view is generally a child up to age 18. Or if you're on a long-term social welfare payment, it can be your child up to age 22 if they're in full-time education. Now, we need to have a look at this increase for a qualified adult, because it causes a lot of confusion for both public and information givers, because there are strict rules attaching to it. The first rule is if you're claiming a PRSI-based payment, that would be the likes of job seekers benefit, illness benefit, invalidity pension, or the state pension contributory. Those 4 payments that have the potential to have a qualified adult rate attached. That increase is means tested. And that catches a lot of people, particularly pensioners, by surprise. They assume that perhaps just because they're going on to their state pension contributory, because they've worked and paid for it maybe over the last 40 years, they assume the rate they'll get for their spouse or civil partner is PRSI based as well, but it is not. And social welfare has to be satisfied that that person is financially dependent on you, the claimant. And the maximum means they allow is €310 per week. They take the view that if your spouse or your partner has either income or means of €310 a week, that they have enough to live on and that they're no longer financially dependent on you. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, if you're in a means tested payment, now there are only two means tested payments under age 66, where there is a potential to have a qualified adult attached. And that would be disability allowance for somebody who has a permanent disability, or job seekers allowance, somebody who is long-term unemployed. And what they do in that case is they start off with a family rate. The rate for yourself, your qualified adult, and any children you have. And then that rate is reduced by the means that they attach to your spouse's earnings. Now, just getting back to that means test on the PRSI-based payments. If your spouse or partner has savings or assets, they have to be submitted to social welfare for a means test. And the standard social welfare means test is, as you see it there on this slide. The first 20,000 is always disregarded. The next 10,000 is assessed at €1 per thousand per week. The next 10,000 then is assessed at €2 per thousand per week. And the balance faces quite a steep means test of €4 per thousand per week. So that's the standard social welfare means test. And it has been in the system since 2007, and it's not likely to change any time in the near future. There are only two exceptions to that means test, and they are applied to disability allowance and carers allowance. And for each of those payments, you're allowed to have 50,000 disregarded. Now, how that would pan out for somebody, if, for example, somebody said to you, my spouse has 57,500 in savings, and I want to claim for them with my, let's say, my state pension. When you apply that formula to 57,500, it would work out at exactly €100 of means per week. And that amount is allowed by social welfare. But at the upper end of the scale, if your qualified adult had assets of 110,000 in their own name, or if as a couple you double that amount in a joint account, if you had 220,000 in a joint account, well, social welfare, when they've carried out their means test, would say to you, that's worth means of €310 a week. And then you're on the lowest possible rate. And just one other slide on that, how it pans out. If your spouse had 57,500, when you're applying for either job seekers benefit or illness benefit, it would classify as €100 of means per week. And you get the maximum qualified adult rate, which is €138. The rate, of course, increases greatly for those on the state pension. And on the state pension, if you were on the maximum rate, you would get €168.70 for your qualified adult if they were under age 66. And that rate would increase to €227 a week once your qualified adult reached age 66. And you can see down along there, if they had 70,000 in savings, you're cut back to 110 euros on job seekers or illness benefit, or to 133.70 or 180 on the state pension. And then on the last line there, you'll see if your qualified adult had 110,000 in their own name, or if as a couple you had 220,000 in savings or assets, well then you're deemed to have means of 315 or 310 euros per week, and then the very lowest possible rate is paid. It's a fairly steep means test because there's nowhere nowadays, either in the north or the south, that you could invest 57,500 and expect to get 100 euros of interest per week. It just doesn't happen. You probably would be lucky to get it per year. Now we look here at unemployment payments for cross-border workers. Now the rules are, if you lose your job completely, you claim benefits from the country where you live. But if you've reduced hours, or if you're working casually, you apply for benefits in the country where you work. And how that might pan out then would be, if you're working south and you're living north, if you're made redundant from your job in the south and you live in the north, you claim job seekers allowance from the north because the north is your country of residence. And if your job in the south reduces your hours, you must apply for job seekers benefit or job seekers allowance from your local interior office in the south. And the reason for that is because it's the country where you are working. And of course, the same thing happens if the situation is reversed. So if you're working north and you're living south, and if you're made redundant from your job in Northern Ireland and you live in the south, you claim job seekers benefit or job seekers allowance from your local interior office in the south because it's the country of residence. And if your job in Northern Ireland reduces your hours, you must apply for benefits in Northern Ireland, the country where you work. Now, a little bit of background information now on job seekers benefit in the south. It's a PRSI-based payment for persons who are unemployed and capable of work and who have sufficient PRSI paid. And if you wanted to see the number of PRSI contributions paid, just look at the very end of the presentation under additional information. Basically, you need to have 2 years paid and a recent history in the year 2020. You must be under age 66 because obviously, if you're now age 66, you should be applying for your state pension. And you have to be available for and genuinely seeking full-time work. If you tell social welfare you're looking for just part-time work, they will not tolerate you for a job seekers payment. It's only available to people looking for full-time work. Now, if you're redundant from the north and you're living south, you claim your job seekers benefit from social welfare in the south. And as a cross-border worker, you may not have paid any contributions to your state of residence, which means the south of Ireland, but you will receive your benefits as if you had been insured there for your last period of employment. So your contributions in the north can be added down to help you get your job seekers benefit in the south. How long will job seekers benefit last for? Well, I suppose the answer to that is it's a very short period of time. And it all depends on the number of contributions you have paid. If you have 5 years or more, that's 260 paid contributions. It'll last for a maximum of 9 months. The reason it's worded in days there, 234 days, social welfare based the week on a 6-day payment period. So 6 days per week, you'll have it all used up in 9 months. And if you have fewer than 260 paid contributions, let's say you're probably relatively young and you haven't yet managed to have paid into the system for 5 years, well, then you're going to be cut off after 6 months. Now, down south, of course, when your job seekers benefit runs out, you can apply for the means tested job seekers allowance. And of course, remember, frontier workers are generally regarded as habitually resident in Ireland for their job seekers allowance, even when working abroad, if they return home at regular intervals to Ireland. Now, just looking briefly at the maximum rates of job seekers benefits down south. The personal rate comes in at €208. And that's paid to you if you can prove to social welfare that you were earning at least €300 a week 2 years ago, 2020, which they refer to as the relevant contribution year. The full qualified added rate comes at the end will show you that you need to earn 300 or more in order to get the full rate of €208. If, for example, just a quick example there, if I had a little part-time job where I earned less than 150 a week, all I could expect to get is €93.30. Social welfare don't want you to be better off unemployed than you were while you were working. Now, can you transfer your job seekers benefit abroad? Well, you can. You can transfer it to the North, to the UK, any EU, EEA country for up to 13 weeks if you're looking for work there. Now, the rule is that you must have been claiming your job seekers benefit down south for 4 weeks before you can transfer it. And your Intrio Centre or your social welfare branch office will issue you a form U2. That's the form you need to take it to the UK social services. Now we're going to take a break here and we'll take any questions there are, if any. So if there are any questions or anything could...
We don't have any in the chat box, but if you'd like to ask a question, please, you just raise your hand and
put on your mic that we can hear you.
No questions, Sheila?
No, grand. We can go on to the next section and we'll be stopping again and we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well, so we will. Now, we're going to look now at the illness payments that are available south of the border. We'll look firstly at the PRSI-based ones with illness benefit. PRSI-based, it's a short-term payment for persons who are ill. Then we have invalidity pension. That's the follow-on payment. PRSI-based, it's a long-term payment for persons who are permanently incapable of work. And here social welfare would be looking and checking that in the next 12 months, you're not going to be capable of any type of work. There's kind of a strict medical criteria for that. There's also carers benefit available, PRSI-based, available to a person leaving work who takes carers leave in order to provide full-time care and attention. And social welfare will give you a payment for up to 2 years while you're doing that. Now, the means tested payments for persons who are habitually resident in the south with disability allowance. A means tested payment for persons with a disability. And in a lot of cases, these persons may well have been born with a disability who now at age 16 are treated as adults in their own right, means tested on their own income and savings, if any, and are awarded disability allowance. And with the carers allowance, it's a much valued payment because it provides a weekly means tested payment for somebody who's looking after somebody on a full-time basis. And it has a very, very generous means test because social welfare are obviously encouraging people to take care of their elderly relatives rather than maybe the state having to pay for them in a nursing home. So we'll have a look at all those payments now. If you're working south and living north, we'll look here at which state pays your benefits if you're ill. Looking at illness benefit, first of all, it will be your country of employment. Under the regulations, it's generally the case that the country where you last paid social insurance that is liable to consider your entitlements to sickness benefits. So if you're now working south and living north, you can add your Northern Ireland social insurance contributions to those that you paid in the south to help you qualify for illness benefit in the south, but only if necessary. If you've been working in the south for 2 years, you'll have the necessary PRSI paid down there to get illness benefit. Now, looking at invalidity pension. Invalidity pension, you'll get a pension from the state where you were insured at the moment you became an invalid. You will always be entitled to the full amount of this pension, even if you were only insured in this state for a short period. 1 year example is the minimum PRSI requirements. So a little bit of further glance now at illness benefit. As I said, it's a short-term PRSI-based payment made to insured workers who are unfit for work due to illness. And remember, we said it's not available to self-employed persons as yet. That payment is not available. The only payment available to them is if they have a serious illness, they can get invalidity pension. Now, to qualify for this short-term payment, you must be under age 66, incapable of work due to illness, and satisfy the PRSI conditions. Class A, the full contribution covers you for that. There's some other minor classes that you may not ever come across. E are Church of Ireland ministers, H are some people who work in the army, and P are share fishermen. But it is generally Class A people you will be dealing with. Now the rate here again, €208, and it's paid to you if you had earnings of at least €300 a week 2 years ago in the relevant tax year. And if you earned less than 300, that little slide there will tell you again. Example, earning less than 150 as a part-time worker, you're now ill, all you will get is €93.30. You can, of course, with illness benefit, get additional payments for your qualified adult and your dependent children. An illness benefit, I did say it was short term. The maximum period of time it can possibly last for nowadays is 2 years. And that is dependent on you already having paid in 5 years of social insurance. Now, there was a time before 2009, if you had 5 years paid in, that you could stay on your illness benefit right up until pension age if you remained ill. And you will come across some old cases where people have been on illness benefit, you know, for guts of maybe 20 years, and they will stay on that until they reach pension age, unless they transfer to invalidity pension. Now, for persons who have between 2 years and 5 years of PRSI paid, their claim will stop after 1 year. And then if they remain ill, they probably have to figure out some other payment to go on to. Perhaps it would be the means tested disability allowance. Some background information now on invalidity pension. It's a long-term PRSI-based pension for persons who are deemed to be permanently incapable of work. And social welfare will require a fair degree of medical evidence here, because they'll look at your case and they're trying to decide if, for example, you'd be capable of any type of work within the next 12 months. And if the answer to that is no, well, then you'll be awarded invalidity pension. Now, to qualify for that, you must be under age 66, incapable of work due to illness or disability, and satisfy the PRSI conditions. And I have a slide on the PRSI conditions under additional information at the end of the presentation. Basically, for this, you need 5 years PRSI. 2 years PRSI will get you the short-term illness benefit, but you need 5 years for invalidity pension. Now, if you've worked in the south and you're living in the north, you will get an invalidity pension from the south. The reason being you were insured there at the moment when you became an invalid. You will always be entitled to the full amount of this pension, even if you're only insured south for a short period, but you must have a minimum of 52 paid or credited contributions in the south, with at least one of these being a paid contribution. Now, quick little example here now of how that would work out. Let's look at David. He lives in the north and he worked there for 30 years between 1990 and 2020. He has worked south for the last 2 years and he was involved in a very serious accident last month, and it's unlikely that he will ever work again. And the question is, which country is responsible for paying his invalidity pension? And of course, the answer to that is the South is responsible. The reason being, invalidity pension is paid by the country where David was insured at the moment he became an invalid, and he has been working south for the last 2 years. He will, of course, fulfill the PRSI requirement insofar as he must have at least 52 contributions paid or credited in Ireland. We know that he has at least 2 years down here. And of the 52 paid or credit, at least one would have to be a paid contribution. But the 30 years that he's paid in the north will be added in as well, and he'll receive a full invalidity pension from the south. And the pay for that, or the payment for it, is €213.50 a week. If he has a dependent spouse, civil partner, or cohabitant, the qualified adult rate comes in at €152.50, assuming, of course, that that person is financially dependent on them and has means of 100 or less per week. And for any dependent child he has, he will receive 40 or 48 euros per week. And one of the reasons why people down south transfer to invalidity pension, well, first of all, your illness benefit only lasts for 2 years. And if you're seriously ill still and unable to work, it would make great sense to transfer over. The money is a little bit higher, not a lot. €208 is your rate on illness benefit compared with €213.50. Your qualified adult here is paid with invalidity pension €152.50 as against €138. And the other significant thing is there's a range of extra benefits that are generally reserved for pensioners, but they're also available to people on invalidity pension. So there would be a free travel pass, household benefits package, help with the electricity or gas, free television license. Schemes like that would be available to a person on invalidity pension, as well as the additional weekly payment. And a guarantee then, of course, that you would be transferred automatically to the full rate of the state pension when you reach age 66. Just looking at payments for carers, because a lot of people, of course, both north and south, fall into the role of being a carer. Firstly, there's a domiciliary care allowance. That's a monthly payment of €309.50 for a child under the age of 16 with a severe disability that requires ongoing care and attention. Now, the idea behind this payment is that it compensates the parent for the extra care and attention that this little child needs over and above a child without a disability. And it's payable until the child reaches age 16. And of course, at age 16, the child in their own right would be applying down south for a disability allowance. Now, the domiciliary care allowance comes in under EU family benefit rules. And that means that the children of cross-border workers living north are eligible for the payment. And it's €309.50 per week. Now, we look at the PRSI-based payment for carers. It's called Carers Benefit. And at this stage, you probably realize that when you hear the word benefit attached to a payment, it's PRSI based. And if you hear the word allowance, you know straight away it's means tested. So carers benefit, it's a PRSI based payment for persons leaving the workforce to provide full-time care and attention for a person with a disability or a child for whom the domiciliary carers allowance is being paid. So that's the significance of getting the domiciliary care allowance. It opens the avenue to you for claiming carers benefit as well, which of course is a weekly payment. Now the rates are, you get a personal rate of €225 for yourself. And you may also get a payment of up to 40 or 48 euros a week for any qualified children. And if you're looking after more than one person with a disability, you'll get an extra 50% in your weekly payment, an additional €112.50 extra. And down south, of course, we have a carer support grant. It's €1,850. It's paid out once a year to all the carers in June of each year. And the idea behind that carer support grant is that it gives you, the carer, a lump sum to go perhaps and have a holiday, take a break, and come back and perhaps do the same thing all over again for the next 12 months. But at least it's a recognition. Now, to be honest, from what I hear from people getting that payment, a lot of them put it towards heating their homes, because if you have a person with a disability in your home, they require a far greater level of heating than the rest of us would. So €1,850 just about get you a fill of oil probably at the moment. Now, a little bit further information here, that periods of insurance that you have completed in the UK, the EU, or another EEA member state may be taken into account to meet the pay-related social insurance contributions that are required for your carer's benefit. And as regards getting a payment within the UK or the EU, it can be paid to a carer who's resident in any country within the UK or the EU who's providing full-time care and attention to another person in that country, provided that the qualifying conditions have been met in relation to the carers benefit legislation. In other words, you're the necessary PRSI to qualify for the payment in the first place. Now, we look at disability allowance. That's the weekly means tested payment down south for persons who are suffering from an injury, a disease, an illness, or a physical or mental disability that has continued or is expected to continue for at least a year. So you can see there's quite a strict medical criteria for that payment. And it's payable to persons between the ages of 16 and 66 who satisfy a medical examination and a means test. And it's the only welfare payment down south that's paid to an individual at the age of 16. All other payments only kick in at age 18. The likes of job seekers allowance kicks in at age 18, but disability allowance is payable from the age of 16 onwards. And of course, when they reach age 66, it would generally be a state pension, non-contributory, that they would be looking for. Now, of course, you have to live in Ireland and meet the habitual residency conditions as well. It's not payable for any period of time in respect of which the claimant is away from the south, except a couple of strict conditions here. If the person is pursuing an approved second or third level course of education outside the state under our Back to Education Allowance scheme, or if perhaps they're abroad receiving medical treatment that is not available to them in the south, they can continue on with their disability allowance under those scenarios. Now, carers allowance, it's a very useful payment for persons down south. It's a means tested payment for carers on low income who live with and who look after a person aged 16 or over who's so disabled as to need full-time care and attention. Or it could be a young child either, a child who is under 16 years of age. If social welfare is paying the full rate of the domiciliary care allowance, €309.50 per month. Now, how much is it? It's 224 years as a max if the carer is under the age of 66. And it goes up to 262 euros when the carer is age 66 or over. Now, of course, there's no qualifying adult rate attaching to carers' payments, only a child rate. And for your children, you could get 40 or 48 euros if you're single, widowed, or separated. And if you're part of a couple, if you're living with your spouse, civil partner, or cohabitant, you can get half rate for each of your children. And of course, as a carer, you're eligible to claim the carer support grant. In fact, it's paid out automatically to you on the first Thursday in June of each year. What else there? Just to say that for people who are already on a social welfare payment, perhaps at this stage in life, a person is on the state pension and caring for their spouse, social welfare won't give them the full rate of the carers allowance in addition to their social welfare state pension, but they will pay them half rate carers allowance. So it's well worthwhile claiming it. Now, the carers allowance can be paid for up to 13 weeks while the carer is outside the state, provided that it is for the specific purpose of accompanying the cared for person while they're getting treatment in an institution of a temporary nature for a disability that commenced before they left the state. So it's really only available abroad if they're having medical treatment. Now we'll take another break there. And if anybody wants to ask a question, just put it on your mic and we'll deal with it.
Can I just say, Sheila, just what you said they had to live with, for carers, they don't necessarily have to live with the person. I don't think
that's right. They can live nearby, but social welfare will check on the fact that there is a direct communication link, like a telephone line between the two houses, so that if the elderly person got into difficulties, they could lift the phone and phone you, to care for them, to come and look after them. You don't have to be living with them, which would often be the case, especially in rural Ireland. The elderly person might be in the next house down on the farm or something like that.
Hi, Sheila. I'm just wondering, how do they assess people's illness or disability?
Now, the doctor in the first place assesses the level of disability. And if you ever got a chance to look at the carers allowance application form, there's a whole section there where the doctor has to assess their mobility, whether they need help with feeding and clothing, whether they're incontinent, their mental state. There's a lot of medical detail that is gone into there. So it wouldn't be possible to pull the eyes over social welfare in that regard. So it wouldn't, because the doctor certifies that. And in recent times, on that application form, they ask you, the carer, to sit down and describe to them the level of care that you need under the varying headings, under mobility, mental awareness, incontinence, all of that sort of thing. That is all done. It's a 42-page application form. So there's an awful lot of detail required by social welfare. But just to say to people, sometimes people are nervous about applying for the carers allowance. You're allowed a 50,000 in savings disregarded. If you're working, or if you're on maybe a private pension, as a couple, you can have 750 euros a week disregarded out of your pension income, and they do not take social welfare payments into account. They're trying to encourage people to care for people in their own homes rather than having them go into a nursing home. And that's why there's such a generous disregard of income. So people that would appear to you and I maybe to be relatively well off, like a person who has, let's say a couple, each of them on the state pension, €253.30 each, and they could have 750 euros in a private pension, they would qualify for the full rate. So they would. Now, it would be paid to them at half rate because they're already getting the state pension, but they'd get the full half rate plus the care support grant. So again, a very generous means test. And I think I put a slide on that under the additional information.
That's great, thank you.
Any more questions at this stage? Yeah, well, then we'll resume and keep going.
Sheila, Anne-Marie, do you want to stop for just maybe 2 or 3 minutes? Everyone can shake about, go and get a cup of tea, and strictly, let's say if we give
5 minutes, we'll give some
5 minutes. Okay,
5 minutes. We're back at a minute past 11.
Okay, so, we'll start.
Great,
okay.
Great.
All right. Okay, folks, welcome back. Sheila, whenever you're ready.
Okay, we'll continue on. So, now in this section, we're going to look at family benefits for cross-border or frontier workers. Now, as a cross-border worker, you're protected by the Ireland-UK Social Security Agreements. That means you're insured in the state where you work. You're entitled to family benefits, even for members of your family who reside in another state, and you will receive a separate pension from each state where you were insured for at least 1 year. Now, the family benefits that we have down south, firstly, we'd have working family payment. We'll have a look at that payment. It's for persons who are working at least 19 hours per week and are judged by social welfare to be on low income. There's child benefit. It's paid for all children up to the age of 16 and up to 18 if they're in full-time education. We've maternity benefit paid for 26 weeks, paternity benefit paid for a lowly 2 weeks just to fathers. Parents benefit, it's a relatively new payment that was introduced a couple of years ago, and nowadays it's payable for 7 weeks for each parent. And we have a one-parent family payment. That's a means tested payment for persons who are parenting on their own. So we'll work our way through those now and have a little bit of background information to each of those. So working family payment, if you're working south and you're living north, it can be paid to persons who are working in the south and living north. It's a weekly tax-free payment available to employees who work at least 19 hours a week who have dependent children. And it's to employees. It's not available to self-employed persons. It's generally paid for 52 weeks before being reviewed. And after 52 weeks, your claim is reviewed, and it's then based on whatever income levels you have at that stage. Now, the rules for that is you must be in full-time employment. What that means is the job has to be capable of lasting at least three months. It's not a bit of just seasonal work you've taken up. You must work at least 19 hours per week or 38 hours over the course of every fortnight. And you must have at least one qualified child living with you, because after all, it's called family income supplement. And each year in the budget, social welfare give us the guidelines for the forthcoming year. And at the moment, these are the guidelines that we're working from. They were introduced from April. They were increased a little bit in April. A family of one child, social welfare would say it would be reasonable to expect that you would have a limit or an income of €551 a week to support that child. And when we talk about a family with one child, it doesn't matter whether you're a one-parent family or a two-parent family, the limits are the same. The limits increase for each dependent child you have. And if you have 8 or more children, the limit nowadays is €1,318 per week. So how do they calculate it? They base it on your net family income. And your net family income in the south would be your gross family income, what you and perhaps your spouse or partner earns, less social insurance, PRSI, and if you're paying into a pension scheme, that would be deducted. We have a charge or an additional tax called the universal social charge. That would also be taken away from your gross income, plus the amount of income tax you pay. So it's based on net family income. And how they calculate it is they give you 60% of the difference between your net family income and the guidelines that they laid down for your family size. Child benefit, that's the monthly payment to the parents or guardians of children under 16 years of age. And you can get child benefit for children aged 16 and 17 if they're in full-time education or full-time training, or they have a disability and cannot support themselves. The rate at the moment is €140 per month per child. Anyone with twins gets 50% extra. So it works out then at €210 per child. And for persons with other multiple births, we're talking here about triplets or worse, it's double, €280 per child per month. Now, what about the UK and child benefit? If you work in the north and you live in the south, you will continue to get your UK child benefit and you'll get a top up of Irish child benefit. The reason for that is the rates south are slightly higher than they are in the UK. So if you work in the south and you live in the north, you continue to get your Irish child benefit. And if you work and live in the south with your children and your spouse, civil partner or cohabitant works in the north, you should apply for Irish child benefit from the Department of Social Protection. Now, maternity benefit south is paid at €250 per week. It's a payment made to women who are on maternity leave from work and who are covered by social insurance. It means that they have adequate PRSI paid into the system. Now, the last day of insurable employment must be within 16 weeks of the end of the week in which the baby is due. And you're advised to apply for payment at least 6 weeks before you intend to go on maternity leave, and 12 weeks if you're self-employed. There are the rules. Now, let's look at what happens if you're working south and living north. So if you're working south, you'll apply for maternity benefit to social welfare. And if you're working in Northern Ireland, you should apply for statutory maternity pay up there. If your partner is working south, they can claim paternity and parental benefits from the south. And if your partner is working in Northern Ireland, they can claim paternity pay through their employer. How long does maternity benefit last? Well, it lasts just for 26 weeks. Now, if a person has a premature birth, maternity benefit is payable for an extra period after the end of the standard 26-week period. Maternity leave from work, of course, is also extended during that time as well. And the extension corresponds to the time period between your baby's actual birth date and the expected date of your maternity leave and maternity benefit. So maybe somebody expecting twins, very often they arrive early. So if they arrive, say, at 33 weeks, you get an additional 7 weeks of maternity benefit on top of the standard 26 weeks. Paternity benefit, it's a payment for employed and self-employed people who are on paternity leave from work and covered by social insurance. It's paid for just 2 weeks. Now, down south, most men do not take paternity benefit because unless your employer is paying your wages, who can afford to live on €250 a week at a time like this with all the expense of a new baby? Now, if you want to take it, you can start your maternity leave at any time within the first 6 months following the birth or adoption placement. And you have to apply at least 4 weeks before the date you intend to start your paternity leave. And if you're self-employed, again, they want you to apply 12 weeks beforehand. Now we look at parents' benefit. This is a kind of a new payment that was introduced. Rather than extending maternity benefit, they decided to bring in this new parents' benefit and parents' leave. There are new statutory entitlements just introduced back in 2019 for parents in the first 2 years after their baby's birth or adoption. The scheme extends to 7 weeks for parents of children born or adopted from July of this year. It was introduced first of all at 2 weeks, then went to 5 weeks. And from July of this year, any baby born from July of this year, the parents can each get 7 weeks of additional leave. Now, you have to get that time off work, but you will not be getting paid from work. You'll be existing and living on the 250 euros that social welfare will give you for those weeks. But where it does come in handy is for a mother who wants to extend her maternity leave and the payment, that at least it guarantees another 7 weeks of payment. Because I don't know about the north, but down south, it is very difficult to get a child into creche under a year old. Generally, the creches have a rule, they need the child to be 12 months old at the time. So quick question now with Sinead, who works south and lives in the north. She works south, she's going on maternity leave in November, and she wants to spend as much time as possible at home with her baby. And she wants a list of the number of paid and unpaid weeks of leave that she can have. Well, I suppose the first thing we'll tell her is that she can have 26 weeks of paid maternity benefit, 250 euros a week from social welfare. In a lot of cases, her employer might cover those 36 or 26 weeks of pay, so they might. And generally what happens then is that she signs the social welfare check over to her employer. The employer pays her her normal pay as usual for those 26 weeks. She can, of course, get 7 weeks of this new paid parents benefit. Again, it'll be paid at 250 euros per week. And down south, there's a period of extended maternity leave. Now, it's unpaid leave, but if she wishes, she's entitled to have 16 additional weeks of maternity leave. But will have to fund herself during that time, either herself or her partner. Looking briefly at the one-parent family payment. That started off its life back in the, I think, 70s. It was known as the unmarried mother's allowance initially. But then, of course, social welfare realized that men too are bringing up children on their own, and they changed the name of the payment to the one-parent family payment. It's for persons bringing up a child or children under the age of 7 without the support of a partner. And initially it was available here until your child finished second level or finished third level education, in fact, up to age 22. But a number of years ago, social welfare decided that really it wasn't necessary to have this payment available to parents for so long. And now they cease it at age 7. And the lone parent, if they're still not in the workforce at this stage, they claim a form of job seekers allowance, so they do. Now, to qualify for the one-parent family payment, you must be the main carer of at least one child under the age of 7, and that child must be living with you. You must not be cohabiting, and you have to satisfy a means test and the habitual residency rules. And initially, there was an earnings limit of 425 euros a week on the payment, but that has been abolished. And nowadays, somebody with maybe income of up to 600 euros a week could expect to get some little bit of payment from social welfare under this scheme. Now, the habitual residency, we look here at the family benefits. As you know, family benefits are exempt from the habitual residency rule under EU regulations. And of course, nothing changed when the UK left the EU. And they're there for certain people who are employed or self-employed in Ireland and subject to the Irish social welfare system. So those that are exempt are persons from the UK, the European Economic Area, and Swiss citizens, and also non-EEA nationals who have previously worked in another EEA member state. Now, just a little bit of background to the one-parent family payment. Social welfare will carry out a means test on income. All income from employment or self-employment is assessed, but the first 165 euros a week is totally disregarded. Maintenance payments are assessed, but if a lone parent is paying a rent or mortgage, part of the maintenance, up to 95 euros a week, can be sidelined towards that. And if a lone parent had assets, and to be honest, I've never come across a lone parent who had savings or assets of more than 20,000, but if they had, the first 20,000 would be disregarded. Now, if there are any questions at this stage on the family benefits, we can deal with them. And if not, we can move on to the final stage.
Sheila, Anne-Marie here, there's a question in the chat from Carol, wondering how same-sex couples fit into the maternity, paternity, parents' benefit.
The very same as everybody else down south. They're fully entitled, so they are. The mother obviously will be on maternity leave, and the other parent of the child. But of course, yeah. I'd have to check on the paternity leave. Whether that, no, I just would have to check on that. I know maternity benefit, that payment for the 26 weeks is fully available, but whether the 2 weeks of paternity, because strictly speaking, I suppose there has to be a process to be gone through before the other parent is recognized as the legal parent of the child.
Okay, thank you.
Same-sex couples, you know, there's a process that has to be gone through down south, maybe even an adoption process to go through.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Now, we're going to look here now at we're looking at state pensions, and there's a lot of interest, of course, in state pensions because everybody hopes to live long enough to claim it, and to claim it for a long number of years as well. And of course, it's a great interest to people who have contributions on both sides of the border. Now, pension age in Ireland down south is currently age 66. There were proposals to change it to 67 and put it up to 68, but it became a bit of a political hot potato in our last general election, and it has been dropped fairly quickly. Now, down south, the government is currently redesigning the state pension. Now, I have to tell you, they've been redesigning it since 2012, but there's a firm promise that they will let us know before the end of the year the format of the new state pension. The existing state pension, believe it or not, dates back to 1961, this old-fashioned yearly average method that they have of calculating the state pensions. The plan on looking at the pension age again, though the Taoiseach has said it will be remaining at age 66. And they also plan on restructuring the method of calculating the state pension. They're going to go, as far as we know, away from the yearly average system because it doesn't work out that fair for a lot of people. So for cross-border workers, where do they claim their state pension? As a cross-border worker who has worked in the South, in the UK, or one or more of the EU countries, they'll make their application for the state pension in the country where they live. It's always country of residence. And details of all the countries that they worked in should be included on the application form. There's a whole section, I think, on page 3 of the application form that asks you where exactly did you work, to list all the countries you worked in so that they can be taken into account. Now, if you have contributions paid in both the South and the North, and let's assume you're living south, So if you apply for a state pension in Ireland and you put on your application that you've worked in Northern Ireland, the UK, an EU country, or a country that Ireland has a bilateral social security treaty agreement signed with. Now, Ireland has bilateral social security treaties, basically with all the countries that the Irish emigrated to. They emigrated to Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, the EU, of course, as well. And social welfare will do the following when you submit your application form. They'll have a look at your contributions, first of all. And if you have enough Irish social insurance contributions paid down south to get an Irish pension, and you need a minimum of 10 years down south for that, that's 520 paid. What they'll do in your case then is they'll set up your Irish pension, pay it out to you, and on your behalf, they'll submit a claim to the other countries where you worked, and they will be in contact with you about your entitlement there. Now, the other scenario could be that when you submit your claim to social welfare because you're living down south, they find out that you don't have 520 paid contributions down south. In other words, you don't have enough contributions paid to get a standard pension here. What they will do then is they'll request your social insurance records from the other countries where you worked, and they'll calculate a pro rata pension for you here based on your percentage of Irish contributions to the total number of contributions you've paid around the world. So it will be a pro rata pension you'll get down south if you have fewer than 520 paid contributions. Now, when it comes to calculating a state pension for persons who have the magical 520 or more contributions paid at the moment. Now, let's assume you're reaching pension age this year, 2022. Social welfare at the moment are calculating the state pension two ways. They're calculating it, first of all, under this old-fashioned yearly average approach. And they're also calculating it under a newer method called an interim total contribution approach, whereby the number of contributions you have paid in will determine how much pension you got, not your yearly average number of those contributions. And the guarantee to you from social welfare is that they'll pay you the higher of the two amounts. And it's likely that this yearly average method will be abolished when the new system comes in. They have kind of signposted that now over the last number of years. And I suppose the reason it's going to be abolished is it's working out quite unfair for a lot of people. An example would be there, two people working in an office. One just came to Ireland, came south, let's say at age 55, has paid in contributions for 10 years. And when their yearly average is calculated, they have 52 contributions per year, and they will get a full state pension from having paid in just 10 years of contributions. You could be sitting next to them. You could have paid in here for 30 years. And when your contributions are averaged over your entire working life, perhaps from the time you were 16 up to age 66, your yearly average is way down and you get a reduced rate pension, even though you've 30 years paid in. It doesn't seem fair to either social welfare or to individuals. And that's one of the reasons why they're going to change away from this old-fashioned yearly average system and go with the newer method. Now, the newer method, or we'll look at the yearly average system first of all, a couple of baseline rules there. You must have started paying PRSI before you reach age 56. And the reason for that, of course, is you need to have sufficient time to have paid in for 10 years. So you need to have at least 520 weeks of full rate PRSI paid. And remember, that's the minimum requirement. It doesn't guarantee your full pension. It's the minimum requirement. And those contributions must be at the full rate, which will be Class A, that you paid as an employee, Class S, you paid as a self-employed person, or E and H, E being Church of Ireland ministers, and H, some people who work in the army. And the last point there on the slide is you must have a certain yearly average number of contributions. And the rate of pension you get is based on those yearly average number of contributions. It's kind of a complicated system, but the next slide would explain it kind of simply. If you've worked all your life and your yearly average comes in at between 48 and 52, hey presto, you've got the full state pension, 253.30. If for any reason you missed out on some contributions and your yearly average is 40 to 47, it's still not bad. You get a 98% pension, 248.30. But if, for example, down at the end of the scale there, if you've just worked for 10 years and you've only 520 paid in, and if those 10 years were maybe between the age of 16 and 26, your yearly average is only going to come in at something over 10, and all you will get is a 40% pension, 101.20, and you could well decide, well, maybe I'd be better off on the non-contributory pension if I could pass the means test. Now, this newer system, the interim total contribution approach, a lot of people prefer this approach because it seems a much fairer system. Now, it's very simple. The full state pension, 253.30, is available to anybody who has 40 years of eligible PRSI. And that's not going to change when the new format comes in. Social welfare has already confirmed that 40 years will be sufficient to get the full state pension. Now, those 40 years, which would equate with 2,080 contributions, they don't all have to be paid. It can include a number of credits. And there's two types of credits that can be included here. These brand new home caring credits that are a godsend to a lot of women in particular who gave up work to rear a family or maybe to look after elderly parents. They can now, if they have 10 years of paid PRSI, add in up to 20 years of credits to that. And there's also the standard credits that we get down south where when we're unemployed or out sick, social welfare gives a credited contribution for each of those weeks. Now, I said that the home caring credits are of particular interest to women. Some men, of course, who have been carers during their adult lives will qualify as well. And the rules about that are that under this new approach to calculating the state pension, in addition to the paid insurance, once you have the 520 paid, these new home caring credits will be available for any week that you were out of the workforce because of homemaking or caring duties. And caring periods for any child up to the age of 12. And for a person of any age who required full-time care and attention can be included in this calculation. And when this change came in 2018, a lot of the pensions were recalculated for women, and a lot of them found themselves much better off under this system because with having had a number of children, a lot of them qualified for the full 20 years of home caring credits. And one of my sisters, just to quote an example, had 10 years only paid into the system, but she had spent 20 years rearing her 4 children, and she nowadays ends up with the equivalent of 30 years of contributions and gets a 3/4 rate pension from social welfare. So she's very pleased with that outcome. Now, for persons that you come across who have fewer than the 2,080 contributions, the fewer than the 40 years paid in, they'll qualify for a reduced rate of state pension, and it's quite simple to calculate it. What you do is you take the number of eligible contributions they have, you divide it by 2,080 to get a percentage pension, and then you multiply by the full rate of the state pension, 253.30. And just a quick example at the bottom of your slide there, our friend John has 1,900 eligible contributions, quite a number, but not quite enough to get the full state pension. So in his case, we take the 1,900 contributions, we divide it by 2,080 and multiply it by the full rate of the state pension, and he'll get €231.40 per week. Quite a considerable portion of the state pension. And if he had a dependent spouse under age 66, he could claim an additional €154.10 for her. Now, there are a couple of pro rata state pensions in the system, and these apply to people who have fewer than 520 paid contributions in the South. And contributions that are paid in the North, the UK, EU states, or states with which Ireland has these bilateral social security agreements, will give cover for a pro rata state pension. Now, the baseline rules here are you need to have at least 52 full rate contributions paid in the South. That is just 1 year. And you need to have a minimum of 10 years paid between the South, the UK, Northern Ireland, wherever. So a minimum of 1 year paid in Ireland and a minimum of 10 years between the two. And they'll give you a percentage pension. If, for example, somebody had 5 years paid in the South out of a working life of 40 years overall, they'd get 1/8 of a state pension. Plus, of course, extra benefits. And let's face it, 1/8 of a state pension is better than no pension at all. And it's a recognition of the contributions that have been paid down south. So just an example here. We take an example of Peter. He's a massive 2,000 contributions paid in total. 400 of them were paid in the south. And we know that's not quite enough. He would have needed 520 to get a standard state pension down south. He's paid them since 1995, and he is 1,600 paid in the north. Now, if Peter was living south, he would be applying to social welfare, and social welfare would request his contribution statement from the north, add them together, check out, first of all, how much pension he would have got in Ireland if all the contributions had been paid down south. And then they'll give him a percentage of that pension based on the 400 euros that he's paid down south. So he'll get, if the 2,000 contributions had been paid down south, he would have got a slightly reduced pension. He would have needed a few more to get the full pension down here. So he'll end up really with the guts of 50 euros a week. Based on the 400 contributions that he paid down south. And of course, his 1,600 contributions in the north will get him a fairly decent whack of state pension up there as well. Now, the non-contributory pension, probably the last payment we'll have a look at. That's the fallback position for pensioners down south who find that they don't have any or enough contributions paid in the state to get a contributory pension. Like, nobody would subject themselves to a means test unless they really had to. And you'd have to do this if you're on just a very low rate of contributory pension. Now, you'll qualify for this pension if you're age 66 or over. Now, you have to be living in the state, satisfy a means test, and satisfy habitual residency rule also. Now, you'll be means tested on income. Now, you are allowed to have a little part-time job whereby you earn 200 euros or less per week. If, let's say, you were earning 250, in that case, you'd have 50 euros gone into the pot for the means test. The first 200 euros would be disregarded. Again, like all welfare payments, you can have savings and assets of 20,000 disregarded. If you were to own an additional property apart from your family home, social welfare would put a value on that and assess it. If you have a farm of land, any income you get from your farm of land would be taken into account. So you can see there they take all sources of income into account. Now, when it comes to your savings and assets, if you're single, all the savings and assets that you have will be assessed. And you have to declare all of those, because as information givers, we have to explain to people, social welfare probably already know how much money you have in the bank. And the reason for that is, if I have money in my bank account, there's a tax down south called dirt tax. It's a deposit interest retention tax, whereby part of the interest I get at my savings has to be returned to the revenue commissioners. It has to be given up. So the revenue commissioners know how much money I have in my bank accounts. And of course, social welfare have access to that same information. So there's no point in forgetting about one of your savings accounts. For couples, half of the combined savings and assets that they own will be assessed. And it doesn't matter whose name it's in, all the savings and assets that they have between added together and split down the middle. And the standard social welfare formula that we looked at earlier is applied. Now, I have my non-contributory pension from the South. What happens if I go to live in Northern Ireland? Well, there's special arrangements there. If you go to live in Northern Ireland and you are in receipt of a state pension non-contributory immediately before you moved, your pension can continue to be paid until you become entitled to an equivalent payment from the North, or for a period of 5 years, whichever is the shorter. But I can't be going to live in Spain just because the weather suits me more over there as an elderly pensioner. I could move to Northern Ireland and hold on to my pension for a period of time, but I can't move anywhere else on my non-contributory pension. Now we're going to just finish up, and we'll finish in time, looking at health entitlement south. The main health entitlement south would be a medical card. It's always means tested, unless, God forbid, somebody has a terminal illness like cancer or something serious, where they're given a discretionary medical card. Now, a medical card covers GP visits, prescription medication, public hospital inpatient and outpatient services. Because if you don't have a medical card, you have to pay 80 euros for your bed per night for up to 10 nights in the year. You could have a bill of 800 euros leaving your hospital ward unless you have a medical card. And the same thing happens if you have to go to accident and emergency. That would cost you 100 euros for your visit there, unless you had a note from your GP. The next best thing to a medical card then is what we call a GP visit card. It's means tested, but it's free to children under 6 years of age at the moment and people over the age of 70. There's a long-term illness card in the system that provides free medication for particular debilitating diseases, the likes of Parkinson's, motor neuron, Diabetes is included on it as one of the more normal disabilities that is included, but the others are the likes of Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, these very debilitating disabilities that sometimes people are born with. They apply and get a long-term illness card, and their drugs and medicines for those particular illnesses are free of charge. Now, if you're living south and you're working north, if you're a frontier worker living in the south and working in Northern Ireland, you will continue to have access to the NHS in the north, but your family members do not have access because they're living south. You'll also be eligible for a medical card in the south. And note that if you cease working in Northern Ireland, you will no longer have access to the National Health Service. You can apply for a means-tested medical card then in the south, which probably wouldn't be a great option for you. Now, if you're living north and you're working south, you're entitled to Northern Ireland healthcare because you're legally resident in the north. And you're also entitled to apply for an Irish medical card subject to a means test because you're working south. Now, there is a medical card based on UK entitlement that has been in the system forever. You may be entitled to a medical card without a means test if you're ordinarily resident in Ireland and you're getting a social security pension from the UK. You could be somebody who's retired from the UK and living south. Or perhaps you're working and paying social insurance in the UK. That gives you an entitlement to what we call a free medical card south. Now, the rules about that medical card is that you must not be subject to Irish social security legislation. In other words, it means that you must not be in receipt of a contributory Irish social welfare payment or be working in Ireland and liable to pay PRSI. That would, of course, apply if you're under age 66. Now, that's the presentation as I had prepared. As I said, moving on there, I have some additional information. There's about 10 slides there, and they just give you a little bit of backup on the PRSI requirements for job seekers, illness, invalidity pension, and so forth. They're not really essential to the training today, so they aren't. So if there are any questions, we'd be delighted to deal with them now at this stage. Just put on your mics or whatever. Are there any questions in the chat box, Anne-Marie?
Sheila, I'm just taking a look now, Sheila.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking over someone. Go on ahead, whoever that was.
No, it's me. It's me as usual, Anne-Marie Aiden. I did have my raised hand thing up. Just a couple of quick things, Sheila, and possibly you did cover them because my internet connection has been very unstable, so it's been kind of phasing in and out. So
okay,
if you've already covered them, that's fair. Just one quick thing about the carers payments and working. Am I right in saying that somebody on a carers payment is allowed to either work or study or whatever? Income assessment aside, but just in terms of the regulations, up to 18.5 hours.
That's right. That's right. That changed recent times. There was a time when they could just work 15 hours. They're now allowed to work 18.5 hours a week on condition that social welfare is satisfied that adequate care has been put in place for the person that they're meant to be looking after full time. So that applies to both carers benefit and carers allowance. Yeah. And under the benefit,
you probably covered it already, but
no, I didn't actually cover that. You're quite right there. Good question. So
okay. The other one was in relation to the means test assessment for means tested payments in relation to the say owning a second property other than your own home, and you mentioned there towards the end that the Department of Social Protection will assess the capital value of that. If that property derives an income, if it's rented out, which way did they go? Did they look at the income or the capital value, or did it? I'm assuming they don't look at both. They don't assess.
No,
both.
they don't look at both. They have a standard rule. The standard rule is if you're applying for a means tested payment and you own a second property, it's the capital value. And the capital value would be how much would you get for that today? And how much would you have left over after you paid the mortgage? That's the standard rule. It's the capital value.
Any rental income, rental income is just disregarded then, is it? Yeah?
In those cases, it's disregarded. But I was going to say there are two exceptions to that rule when it comes to two different payments. And the first one would be the qualified adult rate of a PRSI-based payment. Let's assume you're applying for your state pension and you want to apply for your spouse. Your spouse owns a second property. It's rented out. In that case, it's the rental income that's taken into account and not the capital value.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the other one then, which doesn't often happen, is in the case of working family payment, that payment for people who are working on low income. And I suppose if a person is working on low income, the chances are they probably don't own a second property.
Oh, probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Although one never knows. One never knows.
They could inherit a property, indeed, you know, it could happen. And social welfare are great at having general rules and exceptions to the rules. And that's one of them. The standard rule is it's the capital value, which is the market value after you paid off the mortgage. That's what they will go into the pot for the standard assessment.
Yeah. What you would have left out of it,
what you'd have left, which is fair enough, because if you sell that second property, the banks want their cut first before you start spending the money, don't they?
Don't they just
and
listen, the
yes,
very
go ahead.
final thing, this is not really a question, it's really, well, it's a question for you, but over the last 18 months or so, I've been dealing with a couple of cases of people who lived south, have always lived south, worked north for a large part of their life, and were working north when they had to leave work due to an illness, a long-term illness or clinical condition.
Yes.
And you were saying, and this was my experience, obviously, first of all, I advised them both to immediately apply for invalidity because the conditions were such that they would unlikely ever to work again, let alone in after 12 months.
Yeah.
So the applications for invalidity went in. It took an exceptionally long time, first of all, for invalidity section to determine which jurisdiction was competent. Now, I basically kind of knew myself, well, it's probably going to be the UK, but it took like 4 to 5 months for that decision to even come in. For the clients to be told their claim was therefore being passed to the UK authorities. And then about another maybe 9 months. The whole thing took about 13, 14 months to get sorted.
Yeah, it does. It takes an enormous amount of time.
Yeah. Is there any particular reason in your experience for that? Why it's so slow?
I suppose they're waiting for
in this digital age that we live in.
There shouldn't be any excuse for that. And I suppose, you know, person then has to access the backup, the supplementary welfare allowance system would be our backup down here when you're waiting for payment to come through. But it's totally unsatisfactory for somebody who's worked maybe 30, 40 years, who really needs this payment at this stage. Some payments take a long time, so they do.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, the documentation is there, the legislation is there, it's clearly outlined in the operational guidelines who is responsible for paying it under different scenarios, and it shouldn't take that time at all.
Yeah, and the thing that surprised me was in two particular cases I'm thinking of, in and of themselves, the claims weren't overly complicated. There were no particular, you know, there was nothing missing, there was no documentation that should have been there. It wasn't, you know, everything was as
straightforward.
It should be.
Yes,
and it just seemed to just take an awful long time.
And I suppose
it's not great for the clients.
No, it's not great for the clients, even though they get their arrears. They probably have borrowed
yes, of course,
a little bit long before
yes,
then.
of course, yeah. Okay, listen, thanks. That was an excellent presentation, by the way. Absolutely brilliant as always.
Thank you indeed.
Okay, folks, have we any more questions before we come to a close?
I've no questions, but just to say again, great presentation, and that point I think is so invaluable that everybody's aware of it, because I worked in my job for years and I didn't know about the benefit of getting somebody on non-mobility, because they only need the 260 compared to the bigger amount for the old age pension.
The state pension, yes.
I think that's a valuable point.
It was indeed, and a lot of women down south copped on to that. They felt very, very hard done by having to give up work when they got married and not being allowed to sign for credits. And if they did go back to work in later life, managed to have the 5 years paid in and did become ill, that guaranteed them the full state pension once they got onto invalidity pension. And they thought of it as
and that definitely wasn't even that. I don't think that was not that was still not probably advertised, but I know from a personal thing, to be honest, my own mom, I worked in the business and I didn't know about it for a long time. And I just think that it's just really an invaluable piece of information, But thank you anyway. Thanks, Jesus.
Well, indeed, you have my email address there. If you ever want to add second opinion on anything, I would be delighted just to email me. I'm delighted to hear from people. I like calculating state pensions and things like that. Nerd that I am.
Sheila, thank you so much.
A pleasure.
You are a wealth of knowledge. And we really appreciate you joining us today. For anyone who's still on the call there, we have, if you save the chat function, and there's also the presentation is available to save from the chat box. So before you log out, make sure you do that. I will circulate a private link to this recording, and I must stop recording right now.